Right before we get into this, so just to clarify the questions in the chat here. So David had posted a link for the device enrollment manager, saying that you can set up unlimited devices, but he clarifies that it's actually really only for 1,000 devices. You actually don't need the DEM in the scenario that we were talking about with Anthony. For the scenario we're talking about with Anthony, if we're using autopilot, but you wanted to just use the same account to enroll as many devices as you want, again, Azure AD, set that to unlimited for how many devices a person can enroll, and then in Intune, that value doesn't matter. So that you don't need a DEM account at all in this scenario. The DEM account is used in different scenarios, but for what we were talking about earlier, it's not necessary in this case. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
All right, cool. All right, so we have started recording for the November 2nd meeting of our endpoint office hours, and we're going to cover our Intune 2210 service release. So I will go ahead and start. I'm going to flip back and forth between slides and demo. Some demos are set up, some things are not, but definitely we'll cover this as much as possible. Okay. So this is probably going to be a big one for some of you, probably a little bit more in the K-12 space, but you can now connect Chrome OS devices into Intune. Now, this is a very interesting feature. I like this feature. I had a customer set this up yesterday, but the point of it is not for Intune to take over complete Chrome management. That is not the goal of this feature. The goal of this feature is actually to give you full visibility from a single pane of glass, all of the devices in your organization. And so you can now view the Chromebooks within your console and within the Intune console, and you can do 4 of the following commands against your Chromebooks. So restart, deprovision, lost, and wipe. You can even set these up as a bulk action. So if you need to perform more or one of these commands against multiple Chromebooks, you can do so. So just to take a quick of how you would configure this, and I want to thank Garrett for letting me use his tenant today. So if you'll notice down here, we've added this platform. So this again was after the 2210 update. So we now support, up from 4 up to 6. So we have Linux, Chrome, or the 2 newest editions. So if you click on Chrome, the first thing that you're going to want to do in order to get this set up is to connect your Google tenant to Intune. So again, you'll come in here, and again, all the instructions for this are out on learn.microsoft.com. So you can easily go in there and get the instructions on how to set it up for that. So you'll connect this, set up this Chrome connector here. And then once that is done, it will then pull into your tenant, into your Intune console. It's going to pull in the name of the device. So again, if we just click on the device, we're going to be able to see all of the device properties that are part of that. Again, we'll see, the user that enrolled it, again, from that side, that's not necessarily the user that enrolled it, but the person that set up the Chrome connector. And then we can get the inventory information from the device. So we can see, of course, things like firmware updates, a lot of the hardware inventory as well. And so as we go back and look over this, you'll also be able to see the different commands here. So for example, if you have multiple Chromebooks here in your list, again, we only have 1 in this particular tenant. We can click on our bulk actions. We can come down here, we can pick Chrome OS. And then if we want to run multiple bulk actions against those Chromebooks, you can do those 4. Again, this is just going into preview, so this is brand new. Love to get your feedback on this. Again, I'm not really sure personally what our product direction will be with this, but again, this is kind of going to that unified experience where you can see all the devices in your organization, including your Macs, your iOS, Android. And again, I think after some of the features that you'll see this month, it may have you start looking, at, maybe connecting Intune to some of these other instances. So again, this is brand new. Pretty excited about this. I know a lot of my K-12s hooked this up yesterday just to start getting some visibility into that. And just like the fact that they have one console now that they can manage Windows, Chrome, and now they can start bringing other OSs into that. So really cool stuff there. Now, just want to clarify to something. What does something mean in preview when you see it? Because there's a lot of preview tags floating around on a lot of features. What that means is that, yes, you can put this into production. You can call Microsoft and receive support on the feature set. It also means that that feature set isn't necessarily feature complete. So we could be adding additional support to that specific feature set. So realize that there may be additional features that could be added to this that could be rolled out over time. So group policy analytics, for example, it's been in preview forever, but it does have some new features now. So just be aware of that as you start seeing preview tags. Don't be scared to use the features. Again, they're supported in production. You can call Microsoft and get support for that. So again, that's something that we're pushing to bring everything under Intune. So next one is the software updates for Mac OS. This is actually was out previously before the service release last week, but this only is going to work for devices that you are managing through the Apple Device Management Program through either Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. So if I were to go into that, this has probably been one of the, I would say, if a lot of times I've seen customers shy away from using Intune to manage Macs, probably because it lacks this one feature in our software deployment. So for example, if now I believe you have, this is also in preview, and you can come in here, and as long as we can just call this Mac updates for Mac OS. And it's going to have a ton of different policy settings that you can set for the types of updates that might be received from on a Mac OS device. So again, anything like critical updates, firmware updates, configuration profiles, all of the other built-in apps that you may have on the Mac device. And again, it has the schedule type when you can set that. So yes, so the Intune would need to be the MDM for our Macs for this to work. That is correct. So you would need to set that up as the MDM authority and enroll them. So again, Brian, it should support Apple School Manager as well. And again, to use this specific feature, this is not a premium feature for Mac OS updates. This is part of your Intune subscription and the value that we add to Intune every month. So again, you should see you can set your schedule type there, add a whole bunch of new settings. You also have scope tags, so that's going to be very relevant, probably more so in the higher education settings as you have more decentralized IT models. So again, if you have Macs that are managed by any of your different colleges, you can set the scope tags there. They can have also their different schedules for their Macs and then their assignments. So this is one of the great features that I've been waiting for personally. So again, if you maybe use a competing product and want to maybe start looking to consolidate some of your management tools, and this is one of the features you were looking for, we have this now available for Mac OS. All right, so continuing on, we can now Deprovision Jamf Pro within the Microsoft Admin Center. And I don't have this integration set up in my tenant just because I just don't have an instance of Jamf Pro lying around. But let me just explain to you first what the integration is with Jamf Pro and how this basically worked. What this was is about probably a couple of years ago, this was a feature that was part of Intune where you could, if you had Mac OS devices that were managed by Jamf and you wanted to apply conditional access policies. to those devices, you could integrate your Jamf Pro instance, and this only would apply for the Mac OSs, not any iOS or iPad OS. You could have those Mac OS devices still managed with Jamf, and then they would show up in Intune. So again, they will show up in your Intune, and again, you could use conditional access. If you're not familiar with that technology, conditional access is, I like to call it an if-then technology. If my device or my user meets certain conditions, then I can connect to the resources that user or device needs access to. So that is in conditional access policies, may not necessarily be applied to Microsoft specific software like Teams, SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, whatever. You can also apply it to any Azure, third-party applications that you're using for Azure let's say like a learning management system like Canvas or something you set up in Azure Active Directory as a app. You can apply conditional access policies to that to ensure that your devices are compliant, they are following that zero trust model. So you now have that ability to deprovision your Jamf Pro connector from Intune as well. So if you decide, hey, this is not what I want, you can do that. And then within 90 days, you should start to see those Jamf Pro devices rotate out of your tenant. So good stuff there if you have that. I haven't seen a whole lot of customers set this up. Again, I think if you do apply conditional access policy to Windows devices and you want to extend that out to your Mac OS devices, I think this integration makes sense. So next thing that we added was some new device firmware configuration interface settings. And if you're not familiar with DFCI, is the acronym for it, what this basically is that this is a Microsoft open source UEFI firmware standard that we've open sourced that OEMs or third-party devices can adopt. Our Surface has already adopted, and then OEMs like Acer have adopted to be able to control the firmware. And so in a lot of cases today, you can control the, let's say you can want to turn off the camera. You can do that probably at the OS level, but you can't necessarily do that at the firmware level. So we've actually added some new settings to that firmware. So if you have Surface devices, and we just released support for Acer last month, and you want to be able to control those settings, I'll show you where those are. So what you'll want to do is come in here and create yourself a DFCI policy. So we'll apply this to Windows 10 or Windows 11 later. And again, you have to have UEFI firmware set. You're going to set this here on templates. You're going to come down here to your DFCI, hit create. So I'm going to call this the DFCI policy. And then we'll hit next. So we've added a few new ones to that. So let me just go back and make sure I got those right here on my slide. So the first one is on the cameras. So we've added all of this, the front, rear, and infrared cameras. So again, if you want to turn these off, we've also added this the ports to the SD card, and then we've also added a couple of additional, I didn't have a screenshot of this, but a couple of additional radio options here, such as NFC. So if you have a device that you want to turn NFC off on, you can do that. Again, if you have Surface devices, a large fleet of Surface devices, or you're even considering an order of Surface devices, and you feel and you think that you're going to even want to use DFCI, you need to make sure that those devices are put into autopilot by the partner, not by yourself, but by the partner. That's the key thing that you need to understand. Make sure you read this documentation very thoroughly, because there are specific requirements about how these settings, but this allows you to create a policy in Intune and then turn that, configure that firmware at the device level. So again, maybe you take some of your devices to a juvenile detention facility, and so in that case you want to shut off ports, or maybe that you're using devices for testing, or maybe you're even in our higher ed environment and you're doing some you're working in a secure enclave where you have compliance data and that data is very sensitive and you just don't want someone to stick in a USB drive and pull data off. So again, really cool settings here. But again, key requirement is that a partner needs to upload those devices instead of yourself into autopilot. So we've added new features for that. And again, right now, some of the other OEMs have not embraced this yet. Acer, like I said, just came on last month, but Surface and again, it's not every model of Surface. So some of the older Surface, like maybe the original Surface Go, doesn't have access into DFCI. So it's like the Surface Go 3 was the Surface laptop. The current Surface laptop Goes, you know, any of the current models that have been around for the last 2 to 3 years should have DFCI support. So just consult the documentation as needed there. So let's keep moving on. So the next thing, and this is something that I've found very interesting, and is how we can do reusable group of settings for ASR profiles. Now, if you're not familiar with the term of ASR, it's called attack surface reduction. And basically, if we can now take the same group of settings and we can apply those to different, computers depending on the configuration. So without having to have like 2 or 3 different policies set up, because the more policies that we have to apply to those devices, the longer it could take for login times and performance, just like group policy, the more GPOs that you have later. This is actually something I think would be really cool to have a topic on, and I may look at that at some future point. But what it basically is that you can, but this is going into preview into 2 different areas. One is removable storage for device control and Defender firewall rules. So where you'll actually find this feature is if you come down here into your endpoint security, and then come in here to your attack reception, you'll see that you get all these reusable settings. So the first thing that's just in any scenario, so we'll call this setting 1 here. And if you want to configure your instance, you can have your different instances. But the first thing that you would have to do, and at least looking through this, is to actually create your attack surface reduction policies. And so if you come in here, you can see that you can either apply this to just through an MDM setting, or you can actually apply, if you're using Configuration Manager in a co-management environment, you can use it through Config Manager as well. So I'm just going to pick Windows 10 here. And again, device control is one of those settings that we apply it to. So we can come in here and let's say you want to set up policies so that, for example, and these are some of the policy settings that we can apply these to. So again, we have different, the first section of this was the storage restrictions. So again, for example, let's say you have, you want to prevent installation of the devices, you want to prevent, read or write access onto a USB drive. You can take those settings and apply those to different groups and then use different configuration settings. So it may be, you might have one configuration setting applied to one group of devices and another configuration setting applied to another group of devices, because they may have different, different use cases. Desktops, for example, for in a student lab may have one set of settings, whereas staff laptops have another. So there was actually a good blog post that was posted. I saw the link to it, but I couldn't pull it back. I couldn't snag it the other day. I'll post it in the chat later this week if I can find it. But there's some really cool stuff here. I haven't seen a lot of the K-12 use the ASR settings, but they would be more applicable in both cases. These are really great. Any of these attack surface reduction settings can be used, especially if you want to improve the security, the out-of-box security of Windows, and especially if you have scenarios where you do need to restrict device access, or if you want to use the firewall settings. So that feature again has gone into preview, and if you want to look at that, those reusable settings are located here under your endpoint security node. Go into your attack surface reduction, and then you'll see this tab here called reusable settings. All right. The next are we do have some new settings available in the settings catalog for iPad OS, iOS, and Mac OS. This is if you're not familiar with the settings catalog, I usually like to tell everybody this is where you need to be setting up if you're now starting your migrations into Intune, this is where you probably need to be doing all of your settings. This is where you can set your Chrome browser settings and you can set all of your stuff, because this is our device configuration version 2. There's search capabilities in there. It's easier to find the things that you need. So again, over the last, I would say 4 to 5 months, we've expanded the amount of settings that you have for Mac OS and iOS. So if maybe in your particular institution, again, it's one of those things. If you're only using maybe 80% of a current product that you have and you're paying a lot of money for it, look at Intune right now. We've come a long way in the Mac and the iOS and departments as far as functionality. Would still like to hear feedback if there are gaps between third party, some of the other MDM solutions with that you feel that Intune needs. But if we can fill those gaps, or if we know what's coming on roadmap, maybe we can share that under NDA. But we've added some new settings there, especially with the Ventura being released last week. Also, part of a new feature that was added to group policy analytics, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of stuff in preview where, again, that means we're adding additional features to that. So one of the latest pieces that we added to the group policy analytics is that the scope tags are applied to admins when they import a group policy object. Now, this scenario, I think, will be really important, especially if you have a decentralized IT model, which we see a lot in higher education, where a lot of the device management is handled down at the specific school level. So if you can imagine a scenario where, let's say, a school of business admin, device admin imports a GPO, and they have a scope tag that is all related to the business school. Maybe that is the scope tag. So basically the way that'll work then is that scope tag will then apply to all the admins, the device admins that have the business school scope tag applied will be able to see that imported object. So again, part of that is what they'll be able to do is you'll be able to import the whole point of group policy analytics, and we'll go back to this real quick, is you can come down here and you can import in your GPOs. So again, to just the quick and dirty of how to get this out is to take your you would take your group policy XML file out of your group policy management console. You would want to import that into Intune, and then it will look against certain configuration service providers that we have ones for, and then it will actually show you any unknown settings that might be available depending on your GPO, if it's targeted into AD. And again, you don't have, if we make any changes on that, we actually will update those now, so you don't necessarily have to re-import those settings again. Now, what you can then do is when you're ready to migrate, you can check the box here and then click this migrate button. That migrate button will then take the group policy object that you've imported in and then convert that in the settings catalog. So that provides you a pathway to modern management. And again, that's just one of those things that, over time, as we have been talking about cloud and how to remove those barriers to make the migration to the cloud a lot easier, I definitely would recommend that you take a look at this. One other thing I just always recommend too, when I've talked to the customers I serve, is that take a good look at your group policy objects and just don't migrate everything over. Go back and look and see if you actually need to take all of those GPOs that you've had. Maybe they're not applicable to Windows 10 or Windows 11 anymore. Maybe you've had those since the XP or Windows 7 days, or even Windows 8.1. Get rid of those if they're no longer applicable in your environment, or if you don't see a need. Maybe they've even been replaced with a newer and better policy. And then the last setting I wanted to cover today was we can now filter app and policy assignments for the Windows 11 SE operating system. If you're not familiar with filters, filters allows you to target, you can create filters and apply those to device groups to filter out certain devices. Say, for example, maybe you want to, you only want a device that's running Windows 10 Enterprise to receive a specific application. Now, to create filters, and just to remind you where those are, if you've never worked with those, if you come under here under tenant administration and you click on filters here, you can see all of the different filters that you can create. So I'm just going to call this one filter 2. Again, you can apply these to all of the platforms that we support. So I'm just going to pick Windows 10 or later. And again, this also allows you to build additional device properties. So again, part of these were added under the operating system SKU. And I'm just going to go down here and you'll see that the cloud edition of Windows 11 SE. And again, just to familiarize, if you're not familiar with Windows 11 SE, this is a cloud-only version of Windows 11. We've geared this specifically for K-12 scenarios. You can get this OS on OEM or on Surface Laptop SE. It specifically can only be Azure joined and managed with Intune. One of the cool features of it is it now support their specific features that you cannot find in the full version of Windows. Like we have a feature called federated sign-in with Windows 11 SE, so you can use things such as maybe a Clever badge, or if you use Google Identity at your school, they can actually log in through a federated sign-in. So that's something that just came out for Windows 11 SE on the SV2 or on the Haley version 2 release. But anyway, these two new SKUs here were added, so you can add this as a filter there as well. So again, that wraps up our 2210 service release. Wanted to just do a deep dive in it, show you where the things were. So a lot of times we just read through the document, may not look at the feature, but I wanted to just take a 30 minutes today and show you where these new features were so that you can get more value out of the product. Again, put your questions into the team. We'd love to answer those, and we'll have this recording posted. And then any documentation, again, put your questions in there. We'll link to docs, and hopefully, you can have a little fun with these new features. And then November, I think, is going to be another big month, probably even bigger than October, just because of a lot of the October announcements from Ignite. We'll start to see a lot of stuff coming into preview pretty soon. So stay tuned, because it's only going to get better. So with that, we'll go ahead and stop the recording and stay on in case any